Hi, good morning. Can everyone hear me okay? Pop a yes in the chat box if you can, and that will give me the green light to go ahead. Everyone hear me okay? Perfect. Fantastic. Well, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, and welcome to Module 2 of IIX's Impact Measurement Masterclass. As you heard earlier this week, we have more than 40 students from around the world tuning in from 12 countries and across 5 continents. So it's great to see many of these familiar faces again. Maggie, Paul, and Senti, great to see you. We also have representatives from DFAT, THASM Group, and Singapore's Enterprise Development Board. So fantastic to see you all. So we are starting today at a different time. It's 9 a.m. here in Singapore, so I'm sure we'll also be seeing a lot of new faces as well, especially those tuning in from Canada and the US. So welcome to those tuning in for the first time. And of course, my name is Sarah Tam, and I'm the Associate Manager on the Growth and Innovation team here at IIX, and I will be your moderator for today. Professor Shanaz will be reviewing the key elements of the impact measurement process shortly in the first half of today's session, and that will be followed by our guest speaker, Professor David Musto, who is the Ronald O. Perelman Professor in Finance, as well as the Faculty Director of the Stevens Center for Innovation in Finance at the Wharton School. There's much more to his bio than that, so I'll be back in the second half as well to share more about Professor Musto later on. Finally, before I pass it off to Professor Shanaz, just a few reminders on the tech side before we get started. So as usual, everyone will be kept muted throughout the webinar, but feel free to share your reactions as you listen in the chat box below. We already have a few conversations going on there, so feel free to jump in, introduce yourself, and of course share any interesting and ongoing projects and initiatives that you and your organization are taking charge of. Any questions throughout the session, there is a Q&A icon on the right panel of your screen. So there's a Q&A button there. We typically get several questions throughout the session, as we did earlier this week. And while we might not get to all of them during the live session, we would appreciate your help just going through and upvoting the ones that you like to see answered in today's session, and we'll be sure to get to those right away. Of course, any outstanding questions, Professor Shanaz will be answering them, and we'll be uploading them to the discussion board, so you can expect to see that soon from earlier this week by end of day. Like last week, we also have some poll questions, and there is a poll question up there already for you to answer. Do keep an eye out on the blue notification along the same panel throughout the session, and feel free to drop in your reactions there as well. Of course, if you run into any tech issues, my colleagues John B. and Audrey are on standby, so thank you for that. And please do reach out if you have any questions. That's it on my side for the tech brief and the short intro. So without further ado, let me pass it off to Professor Doreen Shanaz to kick off today's session.
Thank you, Sarah. A very warm welcome to all of you. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. It's so wonderful to have you all back here. Big thanks to David. I know it's really late at night, so thank you for doing this, and of course being an amazing board advisor. And David, you know, this is the bunch of emails I was going to send out today, so you are going to get it. I'm just going to say it, which is the big news for us in the week. And as the students know, because we just had a class a couple of days ago, we actually closed the first Women's Livelihood Bond. Now, as you know, it's an incredible big deal. Just for all of you, David actually sits in the investment committee for the Women's Livelihood Bond series and has been a part of it from the Bond 2. So for the Bond 1 was still our sort of like big experiment. But anyway, David, that's the big news. So the theme for me the entire week has been this, because, it really has been this incredible, sort of relief as well as incredible excitement that something that was created within the essence of it was really how to really connect the back street of underserved community to the Wall Street. and for the first time being able to do that and having women, and on a stock exchange. I mean, all of it was so incredible. So the bond has been paid off. We proved that all of this can happen. So we're still reveling on it. Now, I always start my lectures, as you know, with a story because I love stories. So usually I read a children's story, but I will not do that today, just as last time I did not, because these 3 classes that I have with you, I want you to, live what we lived through at IIX. I want you to feel the story of IIX, where we really took on something so impossible and made it happen, and we keep on doing that, and each one of you can do that as well. So let me transpose you back to 2002, okay? New York City, downtown, literally 3 blocks from the World Trade Center. So to jog your memory, what happened in 2001, in September 11th? We all know what happened. Well, my first company, One Nest, which was a marketplace for handmade goods, for the women who we created the bond for at IIX, I have been working with these women for years. So this is 20 years ago. I created this company where all these women can sell their products. So this is, for those of you in the US, yes, One Nest is the predecessor of Etsy. So it's one of those wonderful stories of my life. So 2001, we went through the whole 9/11. It was quite traumatic. We got trapped in the building, etc. Won't go there. Let's move on to something positive. So 2002 January, we're still reeling from it. The company had to be closed for a month. We were covered. The building got shaken up, covered with dust, etc. So there we were, myself and my colleagues, and we get a box. Okay, so it was a really beaten up box, and we're always very wary at that time because we just came through 9/11 and we didn't know what it was. We look around it and we see postage from the Philippines. What is this, right? We open it up and we see some samples, in which we used to get a lot. We see some handmade, hand-embroidered, photo frames. Like, wow, what is this? And we see a letter. And it was addressed to me, so I open it up. And what the letter said was, we are a group of women from this island called Negros in the Philippines. We are an island where basically the sugar plantations were. The sugar prices have collapsed, and we are in famine, and which I knew. I knew Negros was an island in the Philippines. I spent my childhood in the Philippines, and I knew they were having famine. So the letter continued that we know about your work and we know how you help women, sell the products, to the Western market. So could you please help us? Because we are this organization, Negros for Women for Tomorrow, and we really need to have we are giving loans to the women to start up their business, but they have no place to sell it. So can you please help us? So I still remember we ourselves were reeling, from coming through 9/11, but I just took it on. I said, you know what, I don't care. We have to do this. And I remember we spent literally 3 months really pushing, trying to get, the message across of the impact, this is going to create, the livelihood that it's going to create. It was a lot of hard work, but then we got some really big orders, for them, and from some, really, big name catalogs in the U.S. And it was this incredible sense of achievement. And I remember from there on, these women, sold several times, a few $1 million worth of product. And it was, again, it's one of those wonderful stories where when you create a company, where an entrepreneur, you never actually think about, wow, yes, I'm going to have an IPO. If you have an entrepreneur who actually tells you that from the get-go, I don't think they're really doing it for the right reason. It really has to be for, the change that your company is going to create, how it's going to change the world. And I think for me, it was so important, the impact, that we were supposed to create with One Nest. We were able to do it. And it was, again, kind of one of those incredible moments, with my first company. And fast forward, literally 15 years later, when I started with the Women's Livelihood Bond, and we're putting the portfolio together, I said, I wonder what happened to Negros for, women for tomorrow. Well, we did reach out to them, and that is going to be the story for the next time. I'll tell you what happened. But what's exciting is also the fact that life is one big circle. So do keep that in mind. Everything that you're doing, anything that you're working on, it just sort of comes back, and somehow it all sort of, the dots are connected and it all makes sense. Okay. So with that, let's start now with the class. Okay. So one thing I want to kind of, as you know, whenever I start, I also kind of touch on the reading, which I'm sure all of you are doing all the reading. So just a few, if you're busy and don't have the time, just a few of the readings that you should on. So one of them is the GIN report, which is the State of Impact Measurement and Management Practice. This one will give you an idea of what the investors are looking for. Again, why is it important for investors? Because again, in this class, although it's an entire ecosystem that needs to be together, you'll see we focus a lot on the investors because they are the ones who are holding the capital, frankly, for the growth, for companies like Negros Women. So it is very important that we actually understand the investor psyche. Because there has been a bias for investing in a lot of kind of environmental side so far we see, and it's been called impact investing, but also it's important to understand that it's holistic. You can't just think of the environment without thinking of the social side, as being part of the equation. Do take a look at the WEF paper, engaging all affected stakeholders, guidance engaging all affected stakeholders, for investors, funders, and organization. It very effectively emphasizes the notion of stakeholders. And again, I will talk about that once again when I finish up my story next week, about the Women's Livelihood Bond. But it's important to really think of the ecosystem because you really can't do what you're doing, in a vacuum. The paper by Jed Emerson, which is titled Risk, Return, and Impact, is an important one. It gives you sort of the flavor, how the three are related. And also what you'll see is, for us, we always say this now after doing this for 12 years, we actually see what Jed was sort of stipulating and thinking about and what it should be. We actually see it in numbers, which is there's a direct correlation of risk actually going down when, impact goes up. So, and that's what, of course, you're learning here, how to measure that. And then, of course, there's another WEF paper, which is charting the course, how mainstream investors can design visionary and pragmatic impact investing strategies. Once again, these are very easy reading and very big picture. So, and WEF is good at that. They don't really go deep in anything. So, but it just gives you a flavor, and it's kind of good to have at the back of your head. Now, moving on, the next slide. So what we'll cover today is, once again, why investors should measure impact. Once again, keep in mind that word can be interchanged with anyone else on this side of the equation. People who have controlling capital or procurement, whatever, for enterprises. Learn about impact that can be considered throughout the investment process because it's just not a one-time thing. And how to frankly magnify the impact, in the portfolio. And again, I know many of you are not investors, but it's important for you to see how the financial market thinks. Next slide, please. So why would, why measure impact if you're an investor, or if you are even a, grant giver, or if you're a procurement officer, in a company? So the reasons are, the internal reasons, of course, is, there may be some mission alignment, you have some mandate in the company to do something like this. But what you're also doing is through your capital, through your purchase, you're actually giving a guidance, a mission to the company that, we acknowledge the impact you're creating and you are being rewarded for it by our purchase or by our fund of some sort. And the reality is, you can also inform and refine, along with your investee company or the company you're buying from or giving a grant to, that you can actually shape it as well. And I think it's also very important when you look at the external reasons, the fact that it is something that it becomes a very strong message, to the rest of the community. And this is still very relevant, in many parts of the world where we are still not seeing, sufficient enough of capital or activity, around kind of creating impact and the capital flowing with it. So So all of these things, and again, just take a look at this in terms of what are the reason. It's very important to understand, why we are actually, doing what we're doing. And I think it's also very important, I think, at some point to kind of understand the regulatory side. Once again, I say this, kind of a little softly, because the reality is, the regulatory side is much bigger, say, on the ESG side in Europe. It's now sort of coming more into equation in the US, but in Asia, it's really, really not a part of the equation. And again, in Australia Pacific, it's again, much more kind of taking cue from Europe. So we have various, regulatory kind of bodies and various regulatory, situations. But the bottom line being, I think for this course, we always say, we focused on really measuring impact and really pushing on with it along with the investment, because you don't do it for regulation, you do it because it's the right thing to do. And because it's the right thing to do, you also see the fact that your investment benefits from it. So it should be in spite of the regulation, whether it's asking you to do it or not. And that actually is very, very important, because if you remember last week's class when we talked about ESG versus impact investing, ESG is very much sort of driven by avoiding risk. It's not about, okay, I'm going to create positive impact, as the first goal. It's about, okay, will someone sue me because I don't have people of color in my company? Will someone sue me because, I'm not cleaning up, from my factory waste? Instead of saying, no, we have to have diversity, in the board, we have to have diversity in my company because it's the right thing to do, because it brings different voices and makes my product or service better. Or I'm going to clean up after myself because that is the right thing to do, and I will do it in a way that actually also positively impacts my company. So I think it's we have to think it of from a positive point of view instead of regulatory driven risk avoidance, which of course in the market that's how it is, and you should know that that's how it's looked at. Now next slide, please. So given that we at IIX, we focus on impact investing space in general, and if you remember the spectrum, and if ESG is here, impact investing is here, and then of course traditional investments here. So given that we are here, what we like to focus on once again is really the positive impact that's going to be created, and that's sort of the goal that you start with. So that means that it really is a big focus on the outcome. So, and again, for those of you who are from the nonprofit side in the class, which which a number of you are, what's interesting is to keep in mind the fact that what you're familiar with, which is theory of change, think of this as beyond theory of change. Okay, so for those of you familiar with the for-profit side, this is sort of going beyond basically efficiency. So it's really about effectiveness. And then also the people on the nonprofit side, this is going beyond the theory of change, right? So we're really going into new territory with different groups of people coming from different backgrounds. The focus is really the outcome, but outcome that we are measuring. Okay, it's very, very important. The second thing is we're actually looking at it in a forward-looking way. Okay, and if you remember, I touched on it 2 days ago when we talked with Jeremy. The big thing about impact being measured and being able to go hand in hand with the financial sector, with the financial analysis, is the fact that we have to speak the same language. And the way you speak the same language is, one, the impact has to be quantified, it has to be, and that's where we use the indicator, and then we have to have a financial proxy. And then also we actually have to make it forward-looking, meaning just like when you're investing in a company, I'm going to put in $1 million. Okay, what happens is the entrepreneur is going to show you a business plan where what they're going to do with that $1 million, in the next 10 years, how it's going to grow the company, and they're going to show you cash flow from the financials. You have the income statement, balance sheet, and the cash flow. And the cash flow is where then they will discount it back and show you the value of the company today. So for your $1 million, you're going to get 10% of my company. Right? So pretty straightforward. Now, in terms of the impact side, we have to do exactly the same thing. If it's going to be valued next to that valuation of the company, which means for that $1 million, that the investment are you going to get, what kind of impact you're going to make for the next 10 years. So this is exactly what we do when we're actually doing very deep impact analysis, where we're looking forward-looking, we actually project it out, and then we discount it back, and this is where the social return on investment comes in. And the reason it becomes very important, and again, I touched on it 2 days ago, which is the investors actually really like that. They like the fact that you have this money that you're giving, and then in the market, they're familiar with that. They know what the money is being used for, and they have a plan around it. And then they know the impact that's going to be created, and it goes really hand in hand. Now, again, it's different from, say, if you are, and I say this because we have some students from this background, when you're giving a grant. Because when you give a grant, you're giving the money. Yes, you have some activities that needs to be followed. And then you just sort of say, okay, fine, whatever, 2 years from now, the grant is finished. Then you do some sort of a monitoring and evaluation. Now, that's too late, because if 2 years from now, if you're looking back and saying, okay, what we should have done differently, your money is finished. And then it's sort of like, okay, I guess now we have to give you more money, to see how you're going to do it differently. So with the markets, it's happening kind of simultaneously. So if things not working, you actually tweak it, right away, and what are the changes you need to make. So it's actually quite exciting because it's much more live, it's much more real in terms of the work that you see and what the money is doing. And again, so that's where the link, to the funding comes in. Next slide. So when we are actually looking at, again, so this is, of course, from the investment point of view, when we're looking at getting ready to invest, so if you're thinking, okay, so I am actually looking at this entity, I'm going to invest, what are the things we're going to look at? Of course, you look at the first, and this is, again, remember, you're thinking of impact investing side. You first must think about the framework when you're looking at impact investing, and you have seen kind of in the pyramid, in the class and in the reading, you start off, of course, with the mission of the company and what they're trying to achieve. Of course, very importantly, they have to be able to meet the financial goals. But then you'll say, okay, now are they actually really looking at the social and the environmental ones? And then what's the impact on the community? So if you remember the sustainability pyramid that we have. Now, from that, of course, you have to kind of, as the investor, that has to kind of fall into your strategy. And you have to say, okay, how does this kind of come into my portfolio? Now, again, in terms of making the investment and then managing the investment, I think the big thing, overarching thing with the whole analysis is going to be obviously a risk, how much risk you're taking. And also there, the impact assessment plays a big role, because if you actually see the organization is very much in tune, with what the community where they're operating in, if they need that, and then actually the community is welcoming it, that's going to be, a risk mitigator, and the fact that it's actually going to really help, in the growth of the company. Case in point, you have, for example, one of our entities where they were basically connecting, in the villages, rural, remote side of Bangladesh. They have what the non-profit organizations like Grameen or BRAC did. They very effectively brought solar panels. Okay, so because the grid couldn't go to all the last mile, so it's brilliant. We had clean energy in Bangladesh, before anyone was even kind of talking about it, and it was the fashionable thing. So the remotest part of the country, they had solar grids. Now, solar panels. What was very interesting was a lot of the families actually, so this was given to them for free. So they started, not being too serious about it, and was, behavioral change, oh yeah, okay, whatever, how do we use, because it was given for free by these NGOs. But then what was interesting, this company came up with was actually monetizing it, saying, hey, if you have extra, you can actually sell it to your neighbors who actually may need more. Maybe, now it's the harvesting season, and so they're going to have to work at night, to husk the paddy, and so they need the electricity. So they created this wonderful little technology where you can actually now with a little device, you can actually now sell your excess, which would capture it to your neighbor. And then what was really interesting, if you think about that, and it became a big success. If you think about this in terms of the investment, his clientele was, these, last mile dwellers who literally, had this solar panel that was put on, by some NGOs. And they were kind of, they're happy, but they're a little blasé about it. But all of a sudden, they became this really engaged consumer saying, hey, oh my God, I actually want that because I can actually make money from it with that little device because I can sell the excess energy. So once again, it's really important to kind of understand it's no different from any other investments you make. But in this case, of course, the whole impact of it, becomes very important. The next slide. So I won't spend too much time on it because I just sort of, talked about this, kind of touched on it. But I think one of the things I would actually say is, once again, with impact investing, the initial screening becomes very important. Once again, just a story that I shared, it's not only about the technology, but it actually is a technology which will be embraced very easily. And then also the fact that, there's a need for it, right? So, of course, those are all kind of the pieces you hear, and you hear from David as well, in terms of investment. But I think what's very important in this case is all the impact side as well, and making sure that investment will actually create positive change. And of course, for us, which we see over and over again for the last 12 years, you as the investee or you as the intermediary, you actually have the power to actually shape that investment and that, message, which is, in our case, we always say women have to be front and center. We're going to measure that. We're going to make sure that it's the lives of the women, what is changing, the lives of the children. So I think that becomes very much a part of the equation because they have the companies have to do it. Even if they were going to do it and they at some point try to abandon it, they can't. So you really can put those mechanisms in place. So really, along with the robust kind of financials, you really do need the robust impact assessment. And again, I will really emphasize this is so important, which is please, if you are looking and doing impact assessments, please do not be sitting in New York City and hiring someone, from there who have no understanding of what's happening, where you're making the investment. So I think it is very, very important because I say this because we see this over and over and over again. We really need to make sure we understand what's happening, with the consumers who are part of this equation, and their need is very different from anyone sitting in these big Western cities. So I think we really have to be cognizant of that because, or else you'll just bring in a very different lens of how you're evaluating it. Next slide, please. So in terms of the impact, again, all the readings that you're doing, I think one of the things that you need to kind of absorb and embrace is the fact that you really need to understand there are many tools out there and which tool you want to take. Okay, so that's important because you do have a toolkit, and after this class, you will be ending up with the toolkit, and you actually have to know which tool you're going to use. With impact assessment, again, stories are great, but you actually need to have things which are quantified. So for us, it's very, very important when we start looking, when we're looking at the outcomes, that we actually look at the indicators, for those outcomes. So again, going back to, say, even the solar home, when we actually looked at it, it was not just, okay, how many, kilowatt that they're selling. Of course, that's a fantastic financial indicator, but then also the fact that the money that they're making, what changes it's bringing, to their lives, to the families, and how do we quantify that? Are they actually now sending their daughters to school? Because again, that's an issue in a place like Bangladesh. Are they actually getting access to better healthcare? Because now they can travel to the nearest city to get better healthcare. Are they actually eating better? And again, it seems kind of trivial talking about this, but these are big issues. Nutrition, health, education, etc. Again, with the clientele that you are working with when you are dealing with kind of intense raw impact. So in terms of screening, instead of measuring, instead of assessing, in the portfolio level, the impact story, does come in, over and over again, but it really is based, on that framework. Next slide. So in terms of now, as we're measuring the impact, you also now, as I said, you have to put in now the whole equation of risk. Remember, it's the risk, return, and impact. So, so in terms of the risk, so again, just so you know what we do, we look at it, literally along the way. So we actually, when we're actually reviewing the company, we look at the impact they're going to be creating and how that's going to mitigate the risk of this investment. And again, this is something that's very, very important. And for us, not only just small investments, but also when we are doing, these women's livelihood bond. Again, we look at, multiple companies there as a part of the portfolio. We actually need to ensure when you're looking at this, when you're actually working with these companies, that they have a way to, when you set the framework, if they don't have it, they have a way to actually continue on with that measurement, and they understand the importance of it, because we do see a lot of times the companies will say, well, we are creating impact. Why do we need to kind of go through all this? Well, you do, because it is linked to, your financial results, and you need to come into this discipline, of doing it. Also, what this allows you is, in terms of the when the investment happens, it allows you to bring in various other stakeholders. In other words, if you have a way that you're creating impact, again, going back to, kind of soul share example in the solar selling excess power in Bangladesh, because they were doing the impact assessment, we made an investment, we measured their impact. They were able to actually bring in other stakeholders who actually cared really on the impact side as well. So not only the financial side. So it's really interesting. You can actually bring in a spectrum, of supporters. And also what that does in terms of as you're scaling, it not only creates more impact, you're multiplying the impact, and of course you're multiplying the company, but also what you're doing is in effect, you are positioning yourself with the right kind of partner, now I'm kind of switching gear from the enterprise point of view. When you want to stop doing this, you're actually partnering up with the right people, or at least to give the message to the market what kind of investor you would like eventually when you actually want to exit, meaning sell the company. So the next slide. So this next slide for me, this is really close to my heart. When I started this 12 years ago, you have to understand this was, it really was something really out there and crazy. I still remember after Bellagio meeting, we coined the term impact investing. I came back to Singapore, and Anthony, basically said, please start something. We'll give you the funding. So I started IIX, and I realized very quickly how difficult a task this was. Because when we met with investors, because we had to now kind of, you have to have enterprises on one side, you have to have investors. I remember they just didn't care. They really did not care, and I would have meeting after meeting after meeting, they did not care. And I realized that I was doing it the wrong way. It was, again, going back to even my first company, IIX days, where when I thought people would buy the products because of the impact that they were creating on women, they didn't care. They actually did not care. What they cared was if the product made them look good, if the shawl was beautiful and it actually made them look beautiful, if the photo frame was pretty and it actually would match their home decor. And again, I'm not making a value judgment. The reality is we're all human. And I think who we think about first is ourselves. So it was very interesting for me at IIX to take that message, but of course I quickly forgot that when I started IIX. But then I was reminded of it when I went out, which was the investors are like, what are you talking about? It's my investment. I'm not going to go and, take risk. And no matter how much I said, no. I mean, you're creating all this impact, and which is actually going to mitigate risk. It didn't matter. So I said, okay, you know what? Stop. I need to go back to the drawing board and actually create something where they understand how their portfolio is managed. So this is what I created. So this slide actually is 12 years old. So if you look at it, so I basically said, listen, you have the wealth, right? So because again, in Singapore, we have a lot of wealth, from all over Asia. It's kind of the Switzerland. It has actually surpassed Switzerland in private wealth. So, so it's a very wealthy place. And I'm like, God, just use it for good, some of it at least. So, so what I said was I created this where you see on the left is the investment portfolio, right? And I said, okay, all right, let's speak the language. Okay, so, yes, I have the Wharton degree, and I say this because, of course, David is on the call. I have the fancy Wharton degree. I can do this. Okay, so this is the investment portfolio. These are your assets. You have cash, you have fixed income, you have equity, you have various other alternate assets, and this is usually how the breakup is. If you are doing it right, and again, trust me, people have enough money, they actually think of this. I know, for me, this is foreign. This is more, it's intellectual, but I think this is actually true. And I said, and you have, these are the expected return. And again, I didn't make up the numbers. I looked at it. I researched it. I said, this is what a portfolio should look like, right? Now, of course, on top of that, you have the real estate, you have commodities, you have, the private equity investment. And those are, of course, very long term. So that's why you see it's in the gray. I have 5 minutes. Okay. And then what I said was, but then you also, all of you actually have some sort of philanthropy thing. And I saw most of these people were literally, here they were sitting in Asia, and they were giving millions of dollars to places like Wharton and Harvard and all that, because of course they wanted to have that name. And I said, good for you, good for all these schools for getting your money. But what you can actually do is, can try this new thing called impact investing. And you can see that's the bottom thing, where you can actually link it with your philanthropy. When you're doing the philanthropy part of it, your expected financial return is zero. So we put here negative 100%, meaning zero. You have no return, financial return. However, you actually have high social return. And of course, in this case also, some kind of acknowledgement, from places you care about. So that's fantastic. But what you can actually do is, if you see the arrow from the grant and the impact investing, all of a sudden you actually have the investment. It's a tiny bit. It's like less than 1% of your portfolio. And you can actually achieve two things, which is you can actually achieve the objective of the social objective, and then also you can do the investment. And what I would say, don't even take the money from your investment portfolio. Just take tiny bit from your social, from your foundation side, and invest that. And if it actually happens, it's great. If it doesn't, then you at least met the social objective. So it was very, 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 very interesting to kind of, slowly go through this in terms of sort of trying to explain to them in the language they understood, which is about making financial return. And of course, this is 12 years ago. The world has changed, so we don't have to show this month anymore. But it was wonderful to see, where it all started. So I'll go through the rest of it pretty quickly. So the next slide. So in terms of the, the managing your portfolio, as an investor, you actually see the various outcome. You can see that. So the slide on the right. You really kind of see in terms of the growth of the company where it actually kind of correlates. And you can see all that once again if you have the right framework set in place. And you can actually see in terms of the impact, and the growth that's kind of being correlated. And the fact that, again, the framework will allow you to measure and track all of that. Next slide. So this is the last slide. So again, so just to kind of reiterate, so it's really important to understand where you, as an investor, as a procurement agent, or a grant maker, you actually have to, or a government official, whoever you are, we're in the position to actually, make the change in the enterprise's life. You have to do the pre-investment screening. You have to understand what the mission is that has to link with the financial motives. Excuse me. The post-investment, you have to keep on measuring, because if you don't have the framework, you actually can't do it. And you really need to look at it in terms of the entire portfolio. There's also another thing we do see over and over and over again is this kind of one-off, and you can't really think of it as one-off. It starts sort of building itself, when you think of it, on a portfolio approach. So to wrap up, so what you got, is really a taste of how the investors, kind of look at impact, and what are the things you should consider. And again, what's the approach, on the portfolio side, when you're looking at impact investment. So with that, I'm going to stop. So David can take on. And I know it's late, David, so thank you again for doing this. So Sarah, on to you.
Great, thank you, Doreen, Professor Shanaz. So quick introduction to Professor David Musto. So he is the Ronald O. Perelman Professor in Finance and Faculty Director of the Stevens Center for Innovation in Finance at the Wharton School, where he has been there on the faculty since 1995. He has also served as a senior financial economist at the Securities Exchange Commission from 2005 to 2007, and he has a BA from Yale University and a PhD from the University of Chicago. And in between college and graduate school, he worked for Roland Ross Asset Management in Culver City, California. Most of his work, both theoretical and empirical, is in the area of consumer financial services, mutual funds, and consumer credit in particular. He has also published work on corporate and political voting, opinion pricing, short selling, and cross-border taxation. So lots and lots of expertise and knowledge coming in. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Professor David Musto. On to you.
All right. Hi. You can hear me and see me and everything? All right. We're good. We're good. Okay. Well, thanks. And I should send you a new picture of me. I got how long ago that one was. I don't want to be false advertising here. I've been at the Wharton School for 26 years, and that's right. I was at Roland Ross Asset Management a long time ago in 1987. Actually, let me go to the next slide. Yeah, see, 1987. And actually, it's interesting. These days, a lot of people point to that era in the mid-'80s as the sort of the early days of what we see now with ESG. The reason I say this is that the big push in those days, for those of you who are old enough to remember, was South Africa, divestment from South Africa. There was a desire to affect change in South Africa. And one way that some people found to do that was to through their portfolios, through their investments. And in particular, there was the Reverend Sullivan, who articulated principles by which companies could engage with South Africa, and companies that violated those principles were on a list of stocks that would be removed from the investable universe. So when I started managing money in 1987, I was working for this junior guy at an equity management shop. That's what we were doing. For the most part, most of our accounts were South Africa free, and so we would remove those stocks from our investable universe and sort of optimize over what was left. And it was sort of an interesting quantitative challenge that we faced because, as you can imagine, the stocks that had this South Africa exposure tended to be big stocks, right? We're sitting there in the U.S. South Africa's a long ways away. And so a company that has that exposure is probably going to be a big company. And so really we were taking out a bunch of big companies from our investable universe, giving us kind of a small cap bias. And that was a quantitative challenge that we had to meet. How do we sort of undo, in some sense, tilt away from that small cap bias? So that was interesting, for me coming out of college, interesting quantitative challenge to meet. And so I did that out of college, and then I went to grad school, and I graduated in 95, and I've been at Wharton ever since. I guess that means I just missed Doreen at Wharton, as he must have left right before I got there. But it's been great working with her over the years at IIX. And it is terrific news about the Women's Livelihood Bond. It's been a tremendous fun working on that, doing helping as much as I can with the diligence for those portfolios, and it's been great to learn about those companies. And then also working through this pandemic, right? That's been extra work for IIX, trying to figure out, some companies need the forbearance. Not all of them do, some of them do. And that's a lot of work and thought you have to go through. So that's been something we've been working together on over the past year. So okay, so that introduction mentioned a number of areas I have done research in. Always happy to chat about those, but I'm here mainly because of my work in impact investing, which I got involved in, I would say, about 8 years ago. I grew interested in this topic, and I've published work in several areas, some work on just performance of impact, venture capital, and mission lock. I'm calling it mission lock here. When I say mission lock, what I mean is you have fostered a company from the ground up. You've seeded and grown this company. Now you are setting it free. You're selling it off, or maybe you're taking it public. And of course, deliberate your own capital to go do it again. But you're going to be concerned that the mission that you have built into this company is going to persist into the future. That was sort of the whole point. So we did some research into how do VCs try to accomplish that, how to lock the mission. And then we did some work also published. Our most recent publication was in the area of contracting. We built this big database of financial data and legal documents that were provided to us by a bunch of impact venture capitalists. And that's what we used to gauge financial performance of impact. But also we've been looking at how does the impact goal change the way you write contracts in the VC space. That's what we published most recently, and I'll talk about that. Our next project, I should add, is something that it's more sort of in the ESG than the impact space, and that is a survey we're about to launch of corporations on governance by active versus index funds, which is becoming a big issue in the U.S. And that's a survey that we're going to launch. Okay, so next slide. All right. Okay, so and we're mostly here to talk about impact, but I just want to make sure I draw the right important distinction between impact investing and socially responsible investing. Socially responsible investing has been around for a long time, long time. 100 years ago, people would describe themselves as socially responsible investors, or words to that effect. And what they meant by that was maybe, I don't like alcohol, and I'm not going to invest in any alcohol companies that produce alcohol, or I don't like tobacco, I don't like, whatever. And so I'm not going to be involved in that. I don't want that. I want to align my investments with my values, right? There were wealthy individuals doing that themselves, and then mutual funds grew up to provide that service, and that's been around for a long time. And of course, that's related to the South Africa free question. And even back in the days in the 80s, there was kind of a debate between, should you be selling out of such companies, or should you stay in the company and exert your governance? That could be a tough question. With index funds, of course, they don't sell out of the company, no matter what they think of the management. They're going to stay there, and of course, they're going to stay there and they're going to exert governance. And that's what's become an interesting issue in the U.S. So what's your goal in SRI? Well, your goal might be that, you feel that, these are better investments. Socially responsible companies are better investments. Maybe there's less risk in these companies. And so you're going to get a better return for the amount of risk you're bearing. That could be your belief. You could also think of yourself, maybe you believe you're lowering the cost of capital for the companies that you want to thrive. You want to lower their cost of capital. That could be, though, of course, you have to bear in mind that, their cost of capital is your expected return, right? That's the same thing from the other perspective. So you sort of can't have it both ways necessarily. If you're lowering their cost of capital, well, that's coming out of your expected return, because those are the same two sides of the same coin. Next slide. So yeah, impact investing as opposed to SRI. With social responsible investing, you're just paying market prices. Market has come up with the price of a stock. You're paying that price. That's not what you're doing in impact investing. You're discovering a price. In impact investing, there is no market telling you the price. You have to do your diligence to decide, is this price justified by the cash flows and the impact of this company going forward. That's a situation of that calls for a lot of diligence, and it's also can be afflicted by what economists call adverse selection. Adverse selection meaning that, if you're seeing the deal flow you're seeing might be deal flow that a lot of other people are seeing. And if that's the case, then you get a chance to have part of a deal if other people have turned it down. And the fact that other people turn it down is information that's not necessarily positive about the company's prospects, right? So that's something. So it's a lot of work you have to do in this area to do your own diligence, understand sort of where you are in the company's fundraising, and it's also a situation where long-term relationships pay off a lot. That you get a chance to invest in a company that you get the first chance, you get the first refusal, maybe in a company if you've developed the reputation and the connection that gives you that access, and that can be a tremendous benefit. Where if you're just one more VC fighting it out for the deal flow in San Francisco, and you're trying to get off the ground, well, that's going to be a very tough situation, right? The amount of adverse selection you're going to face could be crippling, right? So this is what you're doing in impact investing. As I say, you're also of course always thinking about the exit from your investment. How do you bring this company to a situation of economic viability and exit out of it in a way that preserves the company's mission and frees up your capital for the next thing? Go ahead. Next slide. Right. So venture capital contracting is a topic that economists love to think about. I'd love to think about it because it's a great example of what economists call the principal agent problem, right? Whenever you hear the phrase principal agent problem, what you're talking about is, principal provides capital, provides resources, and the agent is the one who's going to is going to use those resources towards some goal, towards some payoff for the principal, right? So that's the principal agent problem. The principal wants the agent to work, to do the right thing, to use the capital in the right way that benefits the principal. But of course, the agent is going to have, goals of his or her own, and that is going to be a problem you have to contract around. And there's a lot of things you might worry about as a principal. You might worry about, is the agent going to work hard for you? Is the agent going to bear the right amount of risk? Right? You might want to take big risks potentially as an investor, but the agent might be, a little, might be more worried about the prospects. Right? You often hear of this in the VC space that, as a VC, I have a portfolio of entrepreneurs I've invested with. A few of them could not work out. All I want is, one or two of them to hit it big. That's what the VC will tell you. I'm going to make 20 investments. 90% of my profits are coming from two of those. That's the way they talk, right? 90% of the investment of my profits come from two of those. Most of them are going to go to zero. If that's your attitude, well, okay, that has worked out for a lot of VCs. But from the point of view of the entrepreneur, of course, they don't want to go to zero. They're going to think about the risk very differently, maybe from how you are. So that is an issue that comes up all the time in venture capital. And staging your capital as a VC, that's a very complicated question. You're going to decide at every stage, do I invest more in this startup or do I let it go? And of course, the entrepreneur is always going to see the light at the end of the tunnel. The VC has to think about cutting it off, and that's a big conflict of interest right there. So the venture capital is a principal agent problem. It's actually two layers of a principal agent problem, right? Because you have the investors, the limited partners are the principal, hiring the VC as the agent, and then the VC is the agent who's investing out the capital in the portfolio company. So it's two layers of principal agent problems. that you have to grapple with in these situations. So that's the general VC contracting problem. Now let's think about what you're adding to it when you add impact. So next slide. So yeah, I mean, bear in mind when you think about a VC, contracting in this space, the contracts might look long and detailed, but you have to bear in mind anytime you're writing a contract in this space that contracts are going to be incomplete. When an economist says a contract is incomplete, what you mean is you can't specify in a contract what has to happen in every possible situation, right? You can't possibly specify everything that might happen and what should be done in that state of the world. It's just not possible. Too many things could happen. Now that's generally true, but it's especially true if you're talking about something just that's fundamentally innovative like venture capital, right? You might think, if I'm contracting for a wind farm, well, I understand wind farms. You kind of understand what might go wrong. It's a very simple, straightforward situation where there's many of these wind farms in the world. We kind of know what might happen. Maybe we could write a detailed contract about running the wind farm. But if we're talking about a new venture, creating a new product for a new market, by its very nature, it's going to be very hard to specify what should happen when. So that creates a very big role for oversight, right? For the VC getting seats on the board, overseeing the company at every step, being very much involved in the management, learning at every point about what's really going on, and then trying to point the company in the right direction through their governance rights. Next slide. And this is something that I would say, during my career, this is something that people didn't really think much about, 20 years ago, but recently there's been a lot more attention to another issue in contracting, which is that if I write a contract with you for you to do something for me, if I treat you poorly, I'm writing a contract with you, I want you to do something for me, and I treat you badly, I mislead you, I make you feel badly used, well, you're probably going to still fulfill the contract, but you would see no reason to do anything more than you have to, right? You're going to deliver potentially. I mean, sorry, but you in the spot here. I'm thinking of a general person. If I've been treating someone badly and they have a contract with me, then the incentives are kind of all wrong here, right? That what the person outside the contract is going to do is just adequate. Just do something adequate to fulfill the contract and get out of there, right? Whereas if I maintain a mutually beneficial attitude towards you, if I'm supportive and if I'm honest with you and everything, then that creates an environment where both of us on either side of the contract want to do the best we can for the other side. And there's been a lot of attention in recent years to how contracts are written in a way to avoid a situation where there are bad feelings ex post, and then the either side of the contract ends up just doing the bare minimum, right? Not delivering consummate performance, but just adequate performance. Next slide. So in impact contracting, you have all the problems that you have with normal venture capital, but then on top of that, you have a different questions come up in deal selection, right? So you see a deal flow, you see a flow of companies that you could invest in, and now you're not just making decisions about future cash flows. You're also balancing this with potential for impact, and that striking the right balance, it ends up being a very large part of picking over the deal flow. So that's a new dimension to the problem. And then in the oversight role, you are tracking performance on the impact goals, and think about what we've been through with the pandemic. You're looking at if you've invested in someone and now they're having, it's getting questions are arising about whether they can meet all the sort of covenants in your contract. You have a question, as you always do, of forbearance, allowing them to, waiving off this potential contract violations. But now you're going to be asking yourself not just the usual financial questions, but also how the impact is affected. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the exit from VC is usually just a simple question of, hey, how do we get top dollar out of this? How do we get out of this stock and make the most money, right? With impact, yes, you want to make money, but it's also the case that you have to think about whether what's going to happen to the social benefit of this company once you exit. So next slide. I'll wrap up in just like 2 minutes here. And also just one more thing that for economists, this question is fascinating. When we think about efficient contracting, how to write the right contract, usually the questions that arise are, we want to sort of maximize financial value, contract that maximizes financial value, and maybe, you care about financial value, you care about the effort people have to make, the risk they have to bear. With impact, there's an interesting extra dimension. It's not simply that you're thinking about impact, but there's also the question of how do the contracting parties get utility from impact, right? So think about it. It's a question to ask yourself, right? How do you get utility from impact? Do you get utility simply from the fact that society gets a benefit, right? If there's a company that can deliver clean water to a distressed part of the world, are you happy just to know that they delivered the clean water? Or are you more happy if you yourself played a role in that clean water being delivered to that distressed part of the world, right? So which one is it? I want those people in the distressed part of the world to get the clean water, or I want to make that happen. I get utility from making that happen. What people in the impact world often call additionality, right? I made that happen. It wouldn't have happened without me. We made it happen. And that's an interesting question there, because when you think about how to write the right contract, if people are getting utility from that additionality, you want that to be reflected in the contracting also. Okay, so next slide. Okay. So just quickly, because I'm sort of run over here, but just what do we find? Well, just let me say briefly. Number one, we see that when impact VCs write their contracts, number one, they commit the fund to impact directly in the contract. And I should say that that sounds, well, of course they do. Well, actually, that's interesting for two reasons. Number one, there's a lot of talk in this area of greenwashing, right? You say you're an impact investor, but you're just saying that, and then you go ahead and do the same thing everyone else does, and then give yourself credit ex post. Well, what we see is no, these impact investors commit themselves to seeking out impact, even in the contracts they write. It serves that purpose, and it also serves the purpose, as we were saying before, about setting expectations in the contract to avoid any misunderstandings ex post, to encourage everyone on either side of the contract to deliver consummate performance throughout the life of the contract. We see a lot of role for investors in oversight, right? So the LPs get a lot of chance in these impact funds to sit on committees that assist in the oversight of the portfolio companies. As I say, you might think, well, okay, that could help. These are knowledgeable people potentially. It could help to have them involved in the oversight. But on top of that, as I say, another thing you're doing there is that people get utility. They get utility from being part of this process, and over and above just the utility from good things happening, the utility from delivering those good things. And we see that throughout the contracting. We looked at how the VCs are paid. It's interesting. You might think that impact VCs are paid for the impact they deliver. That's actually not what we saw. We saw they were paid like any other VC. I would say that, what they get for their impact pays off through their reputation and raising the next fund a lot more than it does in the dollars in their pocket for this fund. Next slide. Okay, so let me just say one sentence about performance, or two sentences, and just leave it at that because I've run over. And that is that we looked at the performance of impact VC, and what we found, long story short, is that the way we phrased it was, can we reject the statistical hypothesis that impact VC performs the same as sort of a public market equivalent of investing like in small cap growth stocks? And what we ended up concluding was we can't reject the hypothesis. Statistically, the performance is indistinguishable. It's not worse, not better, but not worse than these public market equivalents. And that was interesting to see, right? Because I would say some people weren't expecting that. Though I should say, when we did that test, we were looking specifically at those impact funds that are seeking market returns. Some are not market rate seeking funds. We did not include, and the funds that are not market rate seeking do in fact perform a little lower. They invest in different sorts of companies, but those that are market rate seeking were right in there in the pack with the other non-impact investment. So that's what I have. Sorry, I went a little long here, but I love talking about this stuff. I can answer some questions. I'm not sure how much time we have, but I'll stop with my slide deck there.
Thanks for that, Professor Musto. And just echoing what Killian is saying in the chat, he really likes this question of utility from impact and would love to learn more and how one can embed this in contracts. So perhaps we can follow up with you after and get some more information there, or any resources that you have that you think might be useful for the group.
Yeah, okay, let me just say the main thing that what we concluded in our empirical study is that we're seeing a lot of that relative to your typical VC, your typical non-impact VC, a lot of oversight, a lot of participation by the LPs in the oversight and governance roles in the fund, and we interpreted that as, well, yes, maybe some of that is just these are knowledgeable people, let's pick their brains, but on top of that, you are directly delivering them utility in a way that, in your typical VC space really wouldn't, when you're not seeking out impact, it really wouldn't play such a role. But yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that more later.
Great, thanks. Well, let's get started with some of the Q&A. So we have 10 in the queue. Right off the bat, number one has 7 likes, so we'll just get started with that there. So the question is, do we need to tailor measurement to specific projects or regions? What would you suggest to a company that operates in different countries or regions where the socioeconomic settings are different? Perhaps Professor Schnott, I'll ask if you can start it.
Thanks, Sarah. I do want to do a time check. So I think maybe what we'll do is we'll just maybe take about 3 questions from this list. And we are now at 10:08, so maybe another 10 minutes or so. Does that work, David?
Sure, yeah.
So we can answer the questions maybe in next 5 minutes or so, and then Sarah, you can have the 5 minutes, right? Okay, all right. And if anyone needs to drop off, please do. And apologies, we always go over because I think I get very excited and my guests get very excited, so we always go over. Okay, so very quickly. So in terms of working across the region, which we do at IIX, with different kind of backgrounds, can you actually have, sort of a framework that works for everyone? Absolutely, and that's why we have values. I'm not, trying to do free marketing here, but that really is from our experience from 12 years, which is the fact that especially when you're working in such a diverse region in Asia, it's very important for you to understand if, clean energy company in India versus a clean energy company in the Philippines, what does it bring to the equation? And I do think it's very important, as you'll see more and more. I mean, we have the data, and we are going to start now really sharing it with all of you, which is we're actually seeing we're being able to benchmark. And that's exactly what IRIS was created. And again, us being sort of one of the founding members in terms of creation of IRIS in GIN was really this sort of general ledger in terms of understanding what are the sort of the basic parameters that you can use to measure clean energy, or you're measuring sustainable agriculture, etc. And within that framework, which you're learning in this class, you can take in some of the nuances, of that country. For example, say when you're clean energy in India, it got a big lift because of the government involvement. So again, when we look at the impact, of course, that's impact that's been created by the company. But the reality is they got a lift from the government. So there was a bit of a dead weight in there in the sense that they wouldn't have been able to do what they're doing if the government involvement didn't happen. Now, we take that into account. Now, in the Philippines, the companies didn't have that. They didn't have this, lift from the government, but still they pushed on with their clean energy efforts and had success. So then you, sitting with the money, have to kind of say, okay, do I give it to India or do I give it to the Philippines? Which company do I give it to? Invest in. So I think absolutely you can, and absolutely you can look at it. And I think, again, that's why this course is very important for you to kind of understand that and being able to sort of create that framework. And you can do it across, every sector. And I think it is important to do that. It's important now with the industry, the stage we're at, to be able to kind of do these comparisons. So David, I don't know what you are seeing in the U.S., but I think if you want to add anything to that.
No, that's pretty. That's a good answer. Because we've had great. My big exposure to this area is with you, right? Looking at the
women's livelihood bond,
the women's livelihood bond investments in so many countries, and now Africa. In Asia, now African countries as well. A lot of the fundamentals are portable one country to the next, but right, the situations vary a little bit, and of course the pandemic hit countries differently.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. The Philippines has, of course, special issues there, but it's so I think the basic diagnostic approach we have has been pretty similar across countries. We just each company, and I need to do my homework each time about these countries to make sure I know what I'm talking about. But I understand that you have to know what you don't know, right? There's plenty I don't know. Yeah,
okay, now that's good. Sarah, which one should we take?
Great, thanks. So next question comes from Hugh. So this was actually asked on the discussion board. So back in Module 1, it was emphasized that it's the output and resulting outcomes that are fundamental for measuring impact. However, don't inputs, so whether at the supply chain or in the impact chain, don't the inputs bring their own impact and thus matter along the value chain even before the final output they contribute to?
Right. No, that's a very, very good question. And I think it also really depends on what size of the company you're thinking about. So for us, because we are focusing very much on SMEs. So with the SMEs, when you're looking at the inputs, yes, exactly. Yes, it absolutely matters. Where they got the coconut from, and we do ask that. Is it organic or in the process that you're using, etc. So absolutely. But are we actually sort of going there and looking at the entire supply chain, of their input? We are not, because again, with SMEs, the more onerous you make it, they're just going to get very, very discouraged. So for us, we do ask all those questions, and it is important for you when you're looking at it to ask those questions. But I think you really have to also take into account the size of the company. You literally can't kill a little baby with calculus, when they're just starting to count. So I think you just need to kind of take those steps. Ask a few questions, the input, very, very important, but then don't get so lost in the supply chain issues, which are very important if you are, of course, working in an MNC and their supply chain is incredibly important, and that's where all the inputs are coming from, from many different directions, for the MNCs, and you really need to almost create frameworks for each one of them. David, anything to add?
I was thinking, just listening to that, it's sort of the same issue in a slightly different way, and it reminds me of the previous question, which is, a lot of the companies we looked at were microfinance, and a question that we were often tossing around is, how do they deal with delinquent accounts? Right? If you're going to be lending and you want to be, boss, agent for good, and you're making these small loans. Well, the positive story sounds so positive, but what happens when it doesn't work out? How do they? What's their forbearance and so on? And of course, that's something that also varied. When the pandemic hit, this became a bigger issue. And so that was a question that we asked a lot, and I think we tried hard to be, to pick investments judiciously on that scale. So it's not inputs exactly, but it's part of their value generation model with this micro lending. And it's easy. Everyone has these wonderful stories about I made this loan and look at the wonderful thing that happened. But in any portfolio of loans, there's some that don't work out, and you have to ask yourself about those too.
Yeah, they don't work out, and also, again, just as you said, what kind of measurement are they taking? Are they going and harassing these women, or are they giving them some, just the same way we give them all waivers?
That's the issue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Next question.
Yeah, and on that note about impact measurement, so this next question comes in from Margaret Hanson Muse, and it is, given the high penetration of mobile phones, is data collection for impact assessments done via an app? I would guess that having data analytics capabilities would be helpful in improving SROI. Professor
Yes, so Maggie, thank you for asking that. So I would say the pandemic really forced us to be extremely creative, and thankfully we did have on IIX side, we had values already very much in works. So yes, so mobile phone, yes, we actually use mobile phone in terms of the verification. We push out the questions, and then with the basically the customers being able to answer that. Now keep in mind also now the customer. Okay, so in our case, we have customers who actually don't have mobile phones, some of them, a lot of them, even with the mobile phone penetration. So we actually had to kind of find ways where to hire a person with a tablet who actually went around from village to village to input the information. We actually had to do that. We actually had to, even when we push the information out, be very cognizant of what phones are used in that place. So what phone, type of phone, if it's not if it's not smartphone, then actually we have those little Nokia ones, which is very, very popular in Asia still. So we basically had to make it friendly for various types of technology, so that we could capture their input / their voice, which we always say. So yes, so I think the mobile technology has played a role, but also be cognizant of the fact when you're working in these remote places, they actually still don't have it. So what will you do, about that? And you just have to find alternate ways. So we basically have these three ways, with the smartphone, with actually the regular phone, and then also just last one, which is just going and collecting data, in person. And we actually did that even during pandemic. We hired people with the mask and all of that, and they went out and then they put the information in the tablet. David.
Let me add one thing to that, and I guess we're sort of out of time here, but one thing about mobile phones, I've seen this in many places, is that that's one place where you have a payment history for all these people, right? If you have a mobile phone, you have a history of paying your phone bill or not, or you maybe been delinquent or whatever. And that can be an enormous source of information to make loans, right? So you see in many cases that lenders pair with mobile phone providers because this is in some sense a bootstrap credit bureau.
David, if I may interject in that, and again, that actually makes complete sense, where it's postpaid. In most of the countries in Asia, for literally I'm talking about billions of people, a mobile phone is prepaid. So meaning, because people don't actually have formal addresses. So what that means is you actually have to go and top up. So that's what we call top up, which is basically you just add money. So, and money runs out on the phone, you can't use it anymore.
So you're not going to go delinquent because you prepaid, but you still history, right? There's still a history.
Yep.
And to have that kind of history per person for a large fraction of the population is something that a lot of lenders is very attractive. And of course, it's something that you could misuse. All these every big data application is something where people might realize they've revealed more about themselves than they wish they had, right? So it's something to approach carefully. But I've seen that a lot. That in many parts of the world, mobile phone providers are sort of a gateway for people who want to get into making small consumer loans, which you could view that as impact investing, or you could not, right?
David, I'm glad you brought it up, okay, because then it's a good way to actually end this conversation, because please, for everyone on the call, fintech is not impact investing, okay? It's only impact investing if you actually know that these people, their lives are changing and they're not going into massive debt, because that side of it and actually capturing the voice and the outcome, the changes in their life, it is almost never done now. So when these fintech companies are coming to us, we are very cognizant of it, because I do think this is where we need to actually, be very, very, very cognizant of the fact that just because you are providing a service to the last mile does not mean you're creating impact. Okay, so that's why I also tell people, please, Prahalad, what he said about the bottom of the pyramid, that book should be burnt, literally. Because the reality is you cannot be thinking of people in the last mile as your consumers only. You have to think of them as producers. You have to help them be producers. You have to help them be empowered. And I think the thought that, oh my God, I just expanded my market and I got that woman in the last mile now, wow, a new customer. Well, what are you doing for that customer? Are you actually making sure the customer actually can pay this, that her daughter can go to school, that she actually has better health care? If you don't think of it holistically, then we are going to end up even worse than we are today. So I'm so glad you brought it up, because again, that is a little bit of my pet peeve, because we do see all these fintech companies now, they're all like, we're creating impact. No, you're not. What you're doing is you're actually following what Prahalad said, really just selling the shampoo in smaller packs for higher price. We cannot do that. We absolutely cannot, unless and until we actually really think of the benefit that we're creating. But with that, we're gonna close up. David, thank you so much. Really, really, really appreciate it. And thanks for staying up late. Sarah, it's all with you. Thanks,
Great.
David.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, bye.
So much. So just a few quick words to wrap up, and I think the last question asked by Maggie was very timely. I just wanted to share something really quickly, and of course I understand if anybody needs to drop off, you'll get a recording of this after. But just to touch on that point about IIX values that Professor Shanaz shared, and I think we're getting this share screen as well. Perfect, it's up. So last week, you would have heard about IIX Values, which is our digital impact assessment platform that empowers end beneficiaries, especially women, to have a voice and a value in the global capital markets. Really what Professor Shanaz was saying, it's really important for people to know and understand what kind of impact they're having on the ground at the primary beneficiary level, but also at the secondary and tertiary levels as well. And so this platform and this tool is able to collect that information and collect that data. I think what we really noticed, and especially amplified over the last year due to the pandemic, is that the current approach of impact assessments can be resource intensive. It can only capture a small sample size as well, and only provides a point in time, limited amount of information or data at one point of time, which is why we do need more digital solutions that can collect impact data more cost effectively and accessible in last mile communities. Captures a larger sample set of voices and beneficiaries on the ground, especially women and underserved communities, and provides more frequent information. And so through this tool, we've been able to, as I mentioned last week, and as Professor Shanaz mentioned as well, we were able to assess the impact of the Women's Livelihood Bond series, and also work with hundreds of other enterprises across Asia Pacific to assess their impact. Over the last, I would say about a year, almost a year now, we've collected over 65,000 data points. Next slide, please. And these data points are really important to help the ecosystem with improved decision making. And so whether that's investors, donors, impact enterprises, and other stakeholders, having this kind of impact data on the ground in Asia specifically is going to be critical as we move forward, especially towards the decade of action and as we move towards the Paris Agreement and achieving the objectives under that. So I don't want to take up any more time. I know we ran quite late today, but we will be sharing more about IIX values as we go on and kind of how IIX has found a solution to impact measurement, especially during COVID and the pandemic. So stay tuned for that, and we'll share more information there. So just to wrap up with some final announcements. So as you can see, we had several questions come in for Module 2 today, as well as several more from Module 1. So Professor Shanaz is responding to those questions, and they will be posted on the discussion board, hopefully by the end of today. So stay tuned for that for Module 1. Module 2 answers should be up by early next week, so we'll also drop you a note through email when that's up and ready to go. Just a reminder that there is no live session next week, and we'll be back week of June 28 to review Module 3. During the break next week, we do recommend and encourage you to review the course videos and the recording online. And finally, we did have a lot of discussion today about deal flows and you know, the enterprise and the investor side. So for those of you who follow us on LinkedIn, you'll see that we just announced our first public enterprise showcase, and that's in partnership with KOICA, which is the Korean International Cooperation Agency. During this event, you'll have the opportunity to network with over 1,200 investors from across the globe, and also look behind the deal flow when enterprises and investors connect. So this event is on July 22nd, and there are limited seats available. I believe my colleague John V will be sharing a link in the chat box, but we'll also share more information through email after this session. So once again, thank you to all our speakers, Professor Shanaz and Professor Musto. Thanks for joining us, and even though it's super late on your side, thanks for tuning in and sharing your insights there. A big thank you once again to the team behind IIX Institute, so John V and Audrey, thank you so much for helping make today's session possible. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in today, and we will see you again the week of June 28th. That's it from our side. Have a good day, good night, good evening, and great time. Bye.